Welcome to the MSDW podcast. I'm Jason Gumpert, editor at msdynamicsworld.com. On this episode, I welcome back Edwin Jongsma of Mavim, makers of BPM tooling built on Microsoft technology. We are discussing the intersection of low-code and business process management. Edwin shares his views on how the growth in low-code tools like Power Platform can offer exciting possibilities for organizations that may feel stuck with legacy processes and systems. This episode is sponsored by Mavim, and Edwin and I discuss how low-code relates to traditional process management. We look at governance in today's enterprise environment, what Microsoft's industry cloud model means for BPM, and what Edwin is seeing related to legacy application replacement. All right. Well, hi, Edwin. Welcome to the podcast. Thanks for joining me today.
Hey, Jason. Thank you for inviting me, and great to be here.
So I wanted to start by asking you what you see in the market with low code today.
Low code is a hot topic. There's a lot of new vendors in the market, and you read a lot of articles about it, and for good reason. I think COVID has forced us to work from home, and it's demanding companies to move faster with their digital transformations. And I think low code is a very good answer to that because it allows the building of modern applications faster. And I think there's a big need for that in the market.
And how do you see the low-code market developing?
Well, Jason, I've done my fair share of Dynamics XRM implementations in the past, and I've seen a lot of customers using it and also growing. And XRM is the predecessor to Microsoft Power Apps, as we all know. And we've seen the XRM applications become more and more complicated through time. And I think we're seeing something similar right now with Power Apps and as it's maturing and companies are seeing the potential and getting good results, the applications are becoming more and more complex, and it's capable of tackling bigger business processes.
I mean, how big can they get? I know that they have really started to touch every element of the kind of solutions that Microsoft customers are building today.
I've seen partners with tens of thousands of users and hundreds of applications. There's probably some big companies that already have over 1,000, of which some of them, are becoming very, very complex. Like a complexity similar more to an ERP, to a Dynamics type implementation. And here's another thing that I forgot to mention, but I also see in the market that adjacent to Dynamics, Power Apps are used to extend the existing Dynamics processes, be it services, customer services, be it in ERP, for let's say in the retail store, Power Apps and Dynamics go hand in hand. So, I think a lot of the same rules should apply to Dynamics, should apply to Power Apps development as well.
It reminds me of a conversation I was having recently with someone. It's, like, as you said, the XRM model has been around for a long time. If anything, it's now more sort of formalized and more supported and more sophisticated in terms of the infrastructure and the tools that are available directly from Microsoft to make it a reality. It also just adds a lot of complexity because of all the new options and new ways in which it can be deployed. And as you said, I mean, big applications can have thousands, tens of thousands of users in a large organization, or it can be many, many applications spread across the organization to cover all these different needs, but all done with this sort of model-driven, right? Is that mainly what you're thinking, like model-driven applications that are helping organizations kind of get their work done and run their businesses?
Well, thank you for saying Mavim-driven, Jason. I would say our platform supports the partner ecosystem and customers who are going big with Power Apps in providing governance and streamlining the process management that goes along with these applications. But back to maturing of the market and more complex Power Apps applications, I would say I do see a need for governance because citizen development for a couple of smaller applications is one thing, and a business department start building something themselves. But if it becomes big, it needs to be managed, right? And it often ends up with IT anyways, and then you still need a platform to govern between the business users and IT. And the more complicated Power Apps, they are also they require integrations with backbones. They require more complicated back-end work, and it's a good mix of business and technical users building something together, but still faster than full-blown application development with let's say, Java, right? Or C Sharp. And that world, requires governance. That's what I see in the partner ecosystem as well.
Do you want to maybe talk about some of the more specific areas where governance really has to be applied? That, you talked about coding sort of from scratch in application development, but in a low code world, are we looking at, I don't know, I'm thinking of like workflow or content types and attributes? Are we talking about interfaces? Can you give me some more context on the areas that you tend to want to see organizations focusing in on to really gain some control?
Yeah, when I talk about governance, what we see, but this is definitely not a complete list, is the processes around signing off, stage-gated reviews, making sure that the applications are built with the proper approvals, that reuse is applied, that the correct architectures are applied, so it doesn't become a spaghetti of applications. Things are still done the right way, right? So that's why you still need those more like IT and business driven reviews, right? That's what I was meaning with governance. And then, secondly, as part of governance, just like it's important for Dynamics ERP implementation, that you have your business process management organized and you think before you build. And in more complicated applications, process management, that's a wider term than workflow, right? A workflow is a term within, let's say, a page of an application where certain actions are taken after a screen. Some data is captured, right? And it needs to trigger a couple of approvals. But the broader workflow is how your data routes through your system from entity to entity, from screen to screen. And that's when applications can become really complex. And that's where business process management can really help guide building robust and mature applications.
And can you talk a little about maybe maturity levels that are required within organizations to actually take on governance in the context of all this application development that has been going on and presumably in many organizations is going to accelerate?
Yeah, that's a good question. I'm not sure if I have the right answer to that. And I also think the answer is not black and white. It's more like a gray area. Every company has to decide and partner has to decide for themselves when governance should be applied. Obviously, you have hundreds of applications and you have thousands of users, that in big scale, big complexities. I think that's an area where you need that maturity. Where does that start? I mean, if you do a one-off MVP development for an application with one or two screens, and you can potentially do that full-on citizen development, then maybe not, right? But somewhere in between, it starts. And I would urge companies to start sooner rather than later because, we've all seen what happened with SharePoint. If you let it go unleashed, it becomes an unmanaged, potentially becomes an unmanaged spaghetti of a lot of things. I've seen that in the past. So I think this is a good time for companies to build their own centers of excellence and use proper software to manage and guide that.
Yeah, and another example I think of in the Microsoft sphere in particular is the push to advance their industry cloud model and all the different elements that are going into those offerings. There's certainly model-driven applications, for example, built with Power Platform and Dynamics applications that are part of that. And, whether those are coming from channel organizations originally, or whether it's developed in-house by Microsoft, or whether it's something that's built upon for a custom application, those are nice solutions. But to me, perhaps if there's not some level of maturity in governance by the organization that's adopting them, it just doesn't seem to me, based on what you're saying, that you can get sort of the full value out of it, that you will end up with some either lack of control or lack of, what's the right word? Lack of vision, I guess you would say, for how you want to manage that going forward.
I think that's a very good point, Jason. And let me build on that. The Microsoft industry offerings, they are a combination often of Dynamics, Teams, ERP, CRM, and I think, and Power Apps, right? So, there are end-to-end processes that don't care about the underlying technology, right? And you want to model that, right? Just so that's a great example, these industry offerings of how mature and how complex applications can become, but solving real industry problems. And that's where the market is moving towards. That's what Microsoft is moving towards. And, there are some partners in the ecosystem who are really geared towards industry. And it's those partners that we're having conversations with.
And what else have you observed around building industry models or practices by partners more broadly?
Now, we just talked about Microsoft and the journey towards industry solutions. Partners have been on that journey as well. And, examples are partners that we're working with and building their, for example, manufacturing IP or their food IP related to Dynamics F&O inside our process management database. We're having partner conversations about building industry models for Power Apps, for low-code applications into our repository. So the conversation is not just Microsoft doing it. I think partners have their own vision on industries that Microsoft is not focused on, or they have specific niche details within those industries where they have their own solutions. And we think with our process database, we offer an excellent repository to harvest all that industry IP, and we're uniquely positioned for that.
Can you give any examples of that kind of work?
Yeah, I already provided the food and manufacturing as examples, but those were Dynamics related. I'll provide a more low code example, and I'll tie this back to what we talked about with governance. We have a module in our platform called GRC, Governance, Risk, and Compliance. We see that a lot of customers and partners that we're talking to, they are building industry solutions related to compliance. For example, a big shipping company that we're working with is using our platform to build a repository for all the things they need to be compliant with. And then they're using Power Apps, low-code applications to execute against the data in our repository. So now we're not just a repository of processes and industry knowledge and IP, but we also, that data that is then in that repository can actually be used to be executed against by a low-code platform. And that is a big strength. And that there's a reference we have in that space in shipping, for example. But we're helping a lot of customers in the realm of compliance. And I thought that was an interesting thing to mention.
So for the industry example you mentioned, can you talk any more in terms of the specifics of what a solution being built actually looks like?
Yeah, so we're talking about compliance and an application that is used in the shipping industry, right? So the example here is on a shipping terminal where there are employees walking around with a mobile application that is built with low code that enforces compliance, that checks audits and reports back. So the low code application is built, the processes are modeled within our platform, but also that mobile application is then using the data as available in our repository because we have already mapped the processes and the compliance rules. Now that database is also used to execute through the low code application.
And what about legacy applications and how those fit into some of these broader topics?
Yeah, Jason, I've seen big companies take on the migration of legacy applications to low code in a big way. Some of these older legacy applications are very complex. And sometimes there are a lot of applications. Some of those are, let's say, a Lotus Notes, one table applications. Obviously, you could move that quite easily. But some of those Lotus Notes applications are fiercely complex. So business process management and governance is still applies, right? So all the things we already talked about are relevant in that migration space as well. But additionally, I would like to highlight a platform feature of Mavim, which is mining, that can help with this, right? Because our mining solution allows you to look into as-is processes as they are. And that can help you identify, your state of your legacy that you want to migrate away from. And that's also how we use it in the world of Dynamics to look at a legacy ERP or an AX to a Dynamics F&O. But same applies to legacy applications that you want to migrate to Power Apps. You can analyze them and help understand the complexity of the processes that you're taking on. And that can also then provide the roadmap to your to-be. You're from as-is to be to help you, to govern you to get to the right endpoint on a modern stack.
I can see a goal of getting off of legacy applications for many reasons, but what do you see as some of the key goals for actually achieving that, a legacy migration?
I'll answer it a little broader. I'd say any move to the business goals of moving to low code is customer satisfaction, a faster development, right? So lower cost, increased effectiveness. And again, with the end goal of user satisfaction, because with the new generation coming to the market, they're demanding more modern tools, right? They want their business applications to work as easy as what they see in the consumer space, right? And I think that's fair. And companies, they need to differentiate themselves to move along and with this digital transformation that is going on right now, or get left behind.
Yeah, I just think back to other conversations I've had where, like with consultants in the Power Platform space, because I absolutely agree with you that these legacy, replacing legacy systems with newer, low code solutions is certainly happening and happening in an accelerated way. I am curious, and something I'd personally like to watch very closely this year is how just the effort to replace something that you would call a legacy application with something more modern almost forces an organization to redefine some of what their business processes really should be. And maybe just in terms of how those legacy applications are perhaps holding them back from that transformation, or from really assessing the business process, more holistically for what the future of their business is going to be.
Thanks for bringing it up, Jason. I didn't mention that when I talked about mining, but doing an as-is mining assessment of a legacy application helps you understand how these processes run. But you're right that, you might identify process issues, you might identify problems, how the applications are being used and how ineffective some of these processes are. And then you can also suggest process change and build a better modern application, not just copy it, right? So I think that's what companies should do if they engage into a legacy migration and use it to make something better, not just a more modern interface, but also improved processes. Thanks for bringing that up.
Sure. And I absolutely agree with you too, when you talked about, more conventional upgrades or migrations like a Dynamics CRM to D365 or Dynamics AX to D365 F&O. I mean, I think that talking point has been there for a long time, but with Power Platform, even with F&O, I think the conversation around, bringing in custom applications to sort of fill some of those needs that maybe aren't part of the core application is becoming much more realistic, in addition to all those other scenarios that are certainly possible out there. So I think you raise a good point there, and one that bears watching, especially if you're in the Microsoft channel or in the Microsoft kind of ecosystem, whether you're a customer or anybody else, about what some of those options are and how they're going to grow and expand.
Yeah, and that raises the point of end-to-end business process management.
Well, Edwin, thanks for taking the time to chat with me today. I mean, I think this is one of the big trends that we're going to be seeing, especially in the Microsoft ecosystem within business applications and really beyond into the broader Microsoft cloud this year. So yeah, again, thanks for taking the time to chat with me about it.
Yeah, Jason, thank you too, and I appreciate it.
This has been another episode of the MSDW podcast. My thanks once again to Edwin for joining me today. For more information on Mavim and the solutions they provide, please visit www.mavim.com. And for more information on how Mavim can support your low-code development initiatives, please see their recent white paper and case study on low-code and BPM. We'll put links in the show notes to both of those and to Edwin's recent article on MSDW related to this topic. And that's it for this episode. If you want to reach me, you can send me an email, jgumpert@msdynamicsworld.com. Please also look for us on Twitter and LinkedIn for all of our updates. Until next time, this is MS Dynamics World, signing off.